So what is the EAC? Glad you asked. EAC stands for Election Assistance Commission, and simply put, our goal is to make your job easier. No, seriously. We were established by the Help America Vote Act of 2002 as an independent, bipartisan commission charged with helping Americans vote. The primary way we do that? By ensuring election officials have the support and resources they need. We help in a few ways. We craft and adopt the voluntary voting system guidelines, accredit test laboratories, and certify voting systems, serve as the nation's clearinghouse of information and best practices related to elections. We also maintain the National Mail Voter Registration Form, which can be used to register to vote, update registration information with a new name or address, or register with a political party, and develop recommendations and standards that address the needs of voters, state and local election leaders, and other election stakeholders. At the end of the day, we work to ensure every eligible American has the opportunities to vote independently, privately, and with confidence in our nation's election system. We do everything in our power to make sure election officials have what they need to support that. Learn more at eac.gov.
Well, good morning. My name is Matt Masterson. I am the chairman of the Election Assistance Commission. I want to thank first all of you for being here and engaging in this discussion with us, attending this meeting today, and participating in a kickoff event for the 2018 election, which I know for the election officials in the audience today, you've already started long ago. So it's just a kickoff for us here today, right? First, I've been instructed to go through the ever important housekeeping items. It's a tall order, but I think I'm up to it. The first item is that this is being recorded both by our folks and C-SPAN, so please silence all devices that you have. Make sure we got everything turned off so we don't have ringing and buzzing throughout the course of the event. Second is the restrooms are located out that door to the left. There's a sign there, so if you need them, just feel free to go, and there's staff out there that can direct you if you can't find it. Also, EAC staff are omnipresent here, buzzing around, running around. They have their hands raised back there. If you need anything at all, if you have any questions, whatnot, please grab myself or one of the EAC staff or one of the fellow commissioners, and we'll be glad to help you out and get you what you need, because we appreciate you being here today. So with that, I just want to start with a couple opening remarks to tee up the discussion for today. The purpose of today's discussion is to explore the most pressing issues facing our election system today by having a discussion with those who are most impacted. That's election officials, that's voters, that's those who research and study, and that's those who participate in the public discussions and engage the process. It's my sincere hope and the hope of the Commission that today's event will result in a meaningful dialogue and conversation that helps to identify areas of emphasis for this year, tease out nuanced challenges facing this elections community, and tease up much-needed conversations regarding the security, access, integrity of the elections process. In doing so, I'd like to start by introducing our opening speaker, and we could think of no one better to tee up those conversations and that nuanced discussion than the man that's going to open the conference today. He is a friend, he's a geek, a self-proclaimed geek, so I don't think I'm out of line saying that. And he's someone who has looked at, studied, and engaged elections in a way that few have. So I'd like to introduce Doug Chapin. He's the director of the program and the Excellence in Administration at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs. He came to that position after 10 years at the Pew Charitable Trusts, where he served as the Director of Election Initiatives for the Pew Center of the States. Many of us start our day reading Doug's blog in the morning to begin things off with a cup of coffee. And today, we're fortunate enough to get his take here live and in person. Those of you who know Doug, he will share, I'm sure, some stories, some quips and thoughts, and most importantly, tee up what we're looking at for this 2018 election season. So let me introduce my friend, Doug Chapin. Yeah, don't spill.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Matt. Good morning. My name is Doug. Usually we say, good morning, Doug. Thank you. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces in the audience today. When Matt called a few days ago and asked if I'd be willing to do this, I was incredibly honored, but also aware a little bit of being like that friend who's always available to help with things like moves and the like. He isn't necessarily good at it, but he always answers the phone, and so I'm happy to be that kind of friend to Matt and the EAC. But seriously, though, I do want to thank the EAC, not just Matt, but his fellow commissioners, Christy McCormick and Tom Hicks, as well as the countless friends and colleagues and former students I have at the EAC. The EAC was a tremendous source of hope when it was created as part of the Help America Vote Act of 2002, was a tremendous source of frustration when it disappeared for several years a while back, and has really been an amazing, amazing asset to the field since its return. I think that's on not just the commissioners, but all of the staff and folks they work with. The EAC has become a center of gravity in the election community that it has sorely needed, and I think will serve it well, not just in 2018, but going forward. So just wanted some quick remarks. The other promise I made to Matt was that no matter what time we started, I would have us done by 10 o'clock for the first panel. So it's a little bit like Woody Allen's quip about Nouvelle Cuisine, that the food is bad, but the portions are small. I will be as brief as possible, but just to tee us up for today, a couple things. The first is I'm fond of saying, and you're going to get a lot of my favorite sayings because it's free and you can't get a refund. But I'm fond of saying that the best thing about beating your head against a brick wall is how good it feels to stop. And I don't know about you all, but in many ways I feel like 2017 was a brick wall against which I'm happy no longer to be beating my head. Various efforts at the national level and across the country that I think were more interference than helpful to election officials across the country. And so to paraphrase the old country song, I think I'm happy to see 2017 in our rearview mirror. All that's left is a federal election year, the 2018 federal election. The good news, as it always is that as an election official, you don't have to sweat the small stuff. The bad news, of course, is that when it comes to elections, there is no small stuff. And I think what's significant about 2018 is that what passes for small stuff in elections is getting bigger and bigger every year. I think the one thing that we have to acknowledge, and I always tell people I'm an election geek, not a political junkie, but I think you have to be blind not to recognize that 2018 is going to be a very high energy and likely very high turnout election in many communities across the country. We're seeing races that have not been contested in a long time, talk about them being contested. I think you can just see the energy from November 2017 and December and see that there is an interest in voting in what's typically called an off-year election that we don't normally see. And with that high energy and with that likely high turnout, you're likely to have close elections. Anybody here from Virginia? Alabama, right? Hell hath no fury like an almost tied or actually tied election. And I think that the nation's eyes will be not just on the nation's eyes will not just be on the work that you're doing, but on the outcome itself. And that will raise the stakes in a way which is challenging in 2018. Something else that hasn't changed, and to my knowledge, hasn't changed. I check election line every day and don't see much evidence of it. Budgets are still tight. We talk about how important it is to run elections securely and accessibly, efficiently, and with integrity, and yet we don't always see policymakers at the federal, state, and local level ponying up. I think it's become a job requirement, if not part of the formal job description of an election official, to do more with less. So with that high energy, high potential turnout election, we're not necessarily seeing tremendous amount of budgetary investment. And so what you will have to continue to do, what the election community will have to do going forward, is find a way to meet an ever higher demand for service with a stable or maybe even declining amount of revenue over time. We're also seeing potential changes in laws. Those of you who are attorneys or paying attention more closely, or just Ohioans, will know that the Supreme Court across town is going to hear an argument today in an Ohio case regarding application of the National Voter Registration Act about the impact of non-voting on list maintenance. Depending on what the Supreme Court decides in that case, we could see significant changes in many states in the way in which voter lists are managed and maintained across the country. That becomes a moving target in a year when moving targets aren't necessarily helpful. We're also seeing growing interest in places like California and elsewhere in what's now known, I saw Amber and Jennifer earlier, what's now known as the Colorado model of election administration and election day, where voters are mailed ballots and then have an option to drop them off, mail them back, or bring them to an in-person polling place on or before election day. We're starting to see interest in vote centers, vote by mail, changing the way that voters both receive, cast, and return their ballots across the country. That too is a moving target, and the good news is that legislators tend to pay more attention in election years, since they too are on the ballot. I had a legal colleague who once observed, and you can tell how dated this conversation is, that there are two things that every elected official in America thinks they're an expert in. One is smoking on airplanes. That's the dated part. And the other is elections, because they've all run in them. So the good news is that policymakers tend to pay attention in election years to election laws. The bad news is that in many ways election years are the worst time to change election laws, because it shifts the ground underneath those of you who actually need to do the work. So the courts, the legislatures, and sometimes even candidates will push for changes in the way in which elections are run across the country. And finally, there is the 800-pound elephant, Russian, what have you, in the room of cybersecurity. I know Chairman Masterson and other folks out there have often said that election officials need to be IT officials, but I think in many ways, cybersecurity and the need to focus on not just the physical security of your election system, but the digital and cybersecurity of your elections is something that's moving from the other duties as assigned part of the job description to an actual line item or paragraph or full section of your job description going forward. And that's one of those things that I know everyone in the field is incredibly committed to doing and wants to make sure they do right. The problem is that in many ways we're catching up to the bad guys, or to sort of the advanced good guys in the field, and learning about how exactly to do that. There are some very high-level things that I know are already in place, and we're going to hear about those today. But there are other things that that each of us and the people we work with are going to have to do a better job of. Better password management, thinking about how securely we back up our information and where we secure it. Knowing how to spot, respond, or not to phishing attempts and other attempts to get at the data that we work with on a daily basis. One thing that I want to point out that I don't think gets a lot of attention in the area of cybersecurity, I think a lot of the focus in the country right now on cybersecurity is on the impact that the security of the election system can have on the integrity of the outcome. We want to make sure that the people who won the elections are the right people, and that we didn't somehow corrupt that result through intrusions into the election system. That is incredibly important. I want to suggest that in many ways, election security is about something even more important, and that is the security of individual voters. All of us are sources of tremendous amounts of personally identifiable data, which are linked to things that we care a lot about: our life savings, our homes, our bank accounts, our details of our personal lives that we don't necessarily want shared with the highest bidder. In many ways, voter records and election files are keys into those vaults for individual voters. And so while it's incredibly important to think about cybersecurity as a way to protect the integrity of the election system in the abstract or writ large, I also want each of you to think of cybersecurity as a way to protect the individual voters you work with. I know for a fact, I've witnessed it personally, and I've seen it in news story after news story. There's no one in this room and very few people in this election community who would not literally go to the ends of the earth to help a voter cast a ballot if they needed that help. We need to have that same sense of urgency to protect the data of individual voters, even if they are not in front of us face to face. We ask voters to give us information in order to help participate in the process. We need to make sure that we're protecting that information so that we're protecting not just their votes, but the rest of their lives that they bring to the table or into the voting booth when they cast their ballots on Election Day. That's the challenge, and that's a lot of stuff to digest. And you'll hear about all of that and more today. The good news to me is that all of those very difficult tasks are in absolutely the right hands. I'm fond of saying, and again, anyone who's ever heard me speak probably knows that I say that other than friends and family, my favorite people in the world are election officials. You do a job that is poorly defined, that has thousands of different requirements. You function as what I call grenade catchers of American democracy. It's your job to handle the difficult questions on Election Day. And I am impressed time and time again, even though I've seen it for 20 plus years, in how capably, enthusiastically, and damn you, even cheerfully, all of you take on that challenge. And so with shifting politics, with shifting laws, with tight budgets, with this need to protect election security and voters across the country, I can think of no group of people in better hands. I can think of no people in whose hands that task is better put than election officials. I'm also, again, I'll return to where I started. I think we are in good hands with the Election Assistance Commission. When I teach my class at the University of Minnesota, I talk about how the EAC is given a lot of responsibility for elections by the Help America Vote Act, but not a whole lot of authority. In many ways, Congress got the agency that it wanted and the agency that it designed. But I think even with that very challenging and limited mandate, the EAC plays a crucial role in bringing the election community together, sharing information at events like this, being in many ways your voice and ear in Washington, D.C. with the federal government. The challenges before us are vast. I know all of you are capable of doing it, but I think you're really in good hands with the Election Assistance Commission here in Washington, D.C. With that, I will say that I am looking forward to today. It's always interesting to hear what folks have going on. I know I will have my notepad out when we talk about cybersecurity because I'm still figuring out where exactly in that bowl of alphabet soup I need to put my spoon. But it should be a great day. I was really honored to be invited to be here and can't wait to hear what all of you have to say. Here's to a successful 2018.
Thank you, Doug, for kicking us off in the right way. At this point, I'd invite up Commissioner McCormick and her panelists. Doug teed it up perfectly. Commissioner McCormick and her panel are going to talk about election efficiency, integrity, and improving services to voters. So with that, I'll turn it over to Commissioner McCormick and her panel.